Welcome to Planetary Gig Talk, Tales of Music and Magic. I'm your host, Jefferson Glassie, Chief Spiritual Dude of the Planetary Gig Society, whose mission is creating unity through music, but as I like to say, making connections through music with the intention of bringing peace. And I am very excited, really more excited than any other podcast that we've done. And this is the 135th podcast, Planetary Gig Talk podcast, because I have the distinct privilege and pleasure of having a conversation with my wonderful, fabulous niece, Natalie Glassie. Natalie, how are you
Hello,
doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Happy to be on Planetary Gigs today.
All right. Thank you for being here. And people are probably wondering, anybody who's listening is wondering, well, why is Natalie on this Planetary Gig Talk podcast? And we're going to tell you because Natalie is a amazing ballet dancer. Is that what you call
Yeah,
ballet
that's
dancer, or do you?
that's a good term.
Is what are other terms that you?
I mean, the old-fashioned, or I guess still technically correct term is ballerina, but I don't. That's a little like, I don't know. Ballet dancer has a bit of a stronger connotation to it, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's what I wasn't thinking I was going to introduce you as a ballerina. I guess yeah, that's sort of a ballet dancer.
Yeah,
Sounds about right.
yeah, we all tend to like that.
Yeah, and we have watched Natalie from the time she was about 4 through New York City Ballet, right?
Yeah, yeah. I went to the School of American Ballet in located in Lincoln Center in New York City, who is the sort of sister organization or sister school of the New York City Ballet, which is
Uh,
one of the arguably leading companies, in the world and in the country for sure. And yeah, I performed with them many times when I was uh a young kid and also into like teenagedom and stuff. But yeah, I trained at the School of American Ballet for 13 years, and I
13
just
years.
graduated in June.
And we went to see quite a few Nutcrackers.
Yes, of
You were
course.
the Clara, is that the name of the?
Yeah, I was.
You were Clara a couple of times.
Couple of times while
Pretty
I
big
was,
deal.
still fit the costume. Yeah.
And now you're in San Francisco also dancing.
Yeah, Seattle.
All right, Seattle,
That's
Seattle. I knew that. I
totally
knew that.
fine. He knew that. He knew that. Yeah, I'm in Seattle, now doing stuff with the Pacific Northwest Valley, which is yeah, located right in the center of the city.
And a similar sort of dance style, Balanchine.
Yeah, yeah. The style is definitely like very similar to, it's the Balanchine style, which is sort of known as like the American style ballet, even though George Balanchine was not born in America. He was born in St. Petersburg, I believe, in Russia. But he, came here and he sort of revolutionized a new style of ballet that's very tied to classical roots, but it has some of its own sort of like um, specifics, its own style. It's a little jazzier, which makes it sound weird, but yeah, and it's sort of become like known as like the sort of American style. And yeah, they tend to follow that here, and they also do a lot of contemporary stuff, and it's a very well-rounded place. But yeah.
And this is the first time that I've spoken on the podcast with a ballet dancer. And there may be those out there, again, anybody listening or watching may think, well, what does ballet have to do with music? Well, you have to dance to music. And Natalie and I have talked for quite a few years about potentially doing this conversation because I'm curious about how this works and how music fits in with this. And we can get into some of those nuances. Hopefully we will. But
Absolutely.
the first thing is, I ask people, because I'm always so curious, how did music come into your life? And I guess for you, I would say, how did music and dance come into your life? I know you were little, but what grabbed you about it? And kind of what was your trajectory? You explained how you would have grown up, studying for all these years, but how did it grab you? What's so great about ballet dancing?
Well, it's a good question. It's a good question. When I was young, I think I mean, this is tends to be a pretty common origin story, I feel like, of a lot of ballet dancers, but I was very energetic. I think I liked to just dance around naturally. I like hearing music and listening to it. And in terms of like the music that was played in my house, I mean, it was a lot of Beatles, as you know, and like the classic things that I think were, really tied to my parents' tastes and things that they just like to listen to around the house and that they wanted their, kid to know. But yeah, I mean, I just my mom and dad enrolled me in like a very small little ballet class in Brooklyn, a mommy and me ballet class. Brooklyn is where I grew up, and I took to it easily. I think I just kind of like was, I liked the focus element, which is weird for someone that young. And you have to have that as a ballet dancer at, even young. And I liked it. I remember liking that, going to the class and listening to the teacher and working on something and getting it hopefully by the end of the class or getting better at it. And I liked dancing around to the music. I liked that it felt free and it was fun and expressive, and it's what I did at home, but now it was in an organized way.
And,
And
and you're still pretty
yeah,
young all this time.
like four, yeah, four or
Yeah,
five.
4 or 5, I think. And so a lot of parents might take their children,
Exactly.
probably more daughters,
Yeah.
to ballet, and they would get in their tutti frou-frous or whatever they are, and they would dance around for like a couple of months, and that would be the end of their ballet career. But not Natalie.
Not for me. The teacher that I had there was this wonderful woman, and she told my parents that I should try auditioning for the School of American Ballet, which I mentioned earlier. And at the time, like that's like an hour commute from our house in Brooklyn. And I remember like my mom joking that, sometime later, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to bring her up there if she gets in, and like, we'll see what happens. Who knows? We didn't have any idea of the history, and the sort of like importance of that school that I would be auditioning for. But my teacher suggested I go do it because she thought I had promise. And again, just I think she saw that I was focused and, diligent, in sort of in that group. And so I went to the audition, and I was auditioned by like three teachers that I had up until the day that I graduated. And I got in. It's like an open audition, and I went back every single year, and each year became, more and more intense in a way. And yeah, I just stuck with it. I have always loved it, and it's presented obviously many challenges, but many more, successes and joyous moments. And
So
so yeah,
when you
that was the origin story. Mhm.
when you tried out, you were still like 5 or something. This is not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was in kindergarten or it was the year before kindergarten. Either one. It was very, very early. And so I kind of hardly at this point remember a time where I wasn't going to the School of American Ballet. Like that's some of my earliest memories. And I remember the audition, I do, because it was kind of scary and intimidating, but um, yeah, I mean, for being that young, but soon that place became like, a second home. So yeah.
And I suppose I don't know enough about classical music upbringing. Certainly, a lot of rock star folks. I mean, and I've talked with a lot of musicians. Many have started out early, some
Mhm.
that early. Usually, a little bit later in their teens, they pick up guitar, they get in a band, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But this is really some focus for all this time and all these years. I suppose, as I say, I suppose they may do this for classical music some, but and you have to take lessons and all that kind of thing. But this is like a whole big school where ballet is the focus.
Ballet is definitely the focus. But I mean, I don't want to jump ahead at a question you might ask me in the future, but something that I was taught from I mean, probably my very first actual class is that the music comes first. So
The
I was
music
really
comes first.
surprised you with that. I thought you would like that, but it
Yeah.
is something that has been fed into my brain since I was like itty bitty. And yeah, I remember it every single day when I dance. Especially I think the style of ballet that I was trained in, this Balanchine style, musicality is like, I mean, however you want to define that, whether it's just being on the music, the counts that were set, or being able to hear it in sort of your own distinct way and, pull out movements that, oh, I didn't know might uh, hold that, with that note there and make it sort of a special moment. However you want to define musicality, it's always been number one. That's what I was taught. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I mean, obviously you couldn't be just dancing your own thing, and have the music playing over there, something different. But how does that work? I mean, now that you've been doing this for such a long time, before you start out a piece, I mean, you do get your counts and you have to count off and come in on the. I mean,
Yeah.
did you come in on the three, or does it get broken down into 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 40? I mean, to 6/16ths, and you've got to be right on it, and you have to put your finger over there with this movement at a
Yeah.
certain particular time. Could you
Yeah.
just explain a little bit of that, particularly for,
Definitely.
musicians and even people like me who
Yeah.
just don't really quite understand how that all comes off?
Absolutely. I mean, for most pieces that I learn, typically, it's, to classical music for sure. I mean, obviously, like it gets a little bit more complicated with some more contemporary stuff, which we can go into, but with the classical music and it's classical ballet, I mean, you usually everything has a count and you're always counting. Like you have um the counts and an internal rhythm playing in your head always. Because to me, there is just nothing more satisfying than like dancing when you can hear that rhythm. It's so funny because it's not tap, yet it sometimes feels like you're tap dancing when you have your point shoes on and you're stepping right on the right count and you can hear why it was choreographed that way to the music. It's so satisfying. And so, learning the counts is really important. And that's usually something, that you're taught right away as you're learning the actual choreography, like the choreography and the counts go hand in hand. And then sometimes, you'll get like, yeah, if you're doing a more contemporary work, which, might not be in point shoes, maybe it's even in socks or something, which is not, um, uh, like it's not something I was trained in, but as you get older, that's what you start experimenting with some of that stuff. Sometimes that music can be a lot more difficult. There are no counts, sometimes it's like you do a piece to ambient noise practically. And
Hmm.
every choreographer has a different way of explaining that to you, whether it's just cues that you go off of sometimes, oh, when you hear it kind of, the the noise really crescendo, you have to, start running to the right. Who knows, whatever it might be, but it can get really more nuanced. But a lot of the time in classical ballet, it's very clear and laid out for you. And that stuff, is passed down through everyone that performs a role.
So before you start, I mean, you kind of either somebody the conductor or somebody, or maybe it's just the music. It's 1, 2, 3, and then you go, and then you just have to stay on beat, and you sort of, do you have to keep, like musicians talk about sort of knowing where the one is.
Yeah.
So you have to keep track of that, and you're not counting all the time in your head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're not counting all the time. And as
but you're
you get
feeling
more
it all the time.
100%. Yeah. As you get more comfortable in a role, I feel like you can often like the muscle memory kicks in. So if you practice something to the right counts, a certain number of times, by the time that you're on stage, you're likely not saying in your head, like, yeah, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4,
Right.
up 5, down 6 and 7 and 8. You might just do that automatically, but you have to train yourself, and go through it enough times so that that happens automatically. Like, it's definitely a process. And then I have done other things where the counts are so complicated and like the music is so fast or something like that, that you're doing something in a canon, which, to give a little bit more context, is when you might have a line of people and everybody's going one after another, and it's sort of creating a cool like visual effect. You might be on the third four, the third, and you have to like count and watch everybody else go before you and not go too early and not go too late. And so I have had times where I've been on stage and I have been counting in my head loudly and, really hoping I don't miss something. But yeah, a lot of the time, by the moment you're on stage, you can kind of, feel that music a little more naturally because you've sort of trained that way. But it's really important.
And it's like with musicians, I mean, you're playing along, and if all of a sudden you're like, ooh, boy, I don't remember the chord or the lyric here, you just have to keep on.
Yeah,
Except for a musician, you're playing an instrument or you're singing, but for you could have like arms and legs up in the air. So you have
yeah.
to really know how to keep on without sort of falling down and completely messing up the dance.
Totally. And I mean, I feel like I've been so lucky. Like, I've performed with some like wonderful musicians playing, music as I've danced. And I feel like you know, I think it makes me think of a quote that George Balanchine actually said that was, again, this is like an example of one of those things that teachers repeated to me, I don't know how many times, but he said, I want to see the music and hear the dance. I think I said that right. See the
See the
music,
music.
dance. So that means when he's sitting in the audience, he
Oh,
he wants you to be so on it and have such a good as the dancer, have such a good understanding of the music. And like I said, having those point shoes hit the exact right note, that he feels like he's seeing the music come to life. And when he's listening to the music, he wants to just like feel like you can just envision what the dance would be, and I always that's a cool quote. I like to keep that one in
yeah.
mind.
So you're really merging the dance and um, the music in a very you know deep way. You're sort of embodying. I mean, you are embodying the music,
Yeah.
and this goes back eons in humans' history because we've been dancing, and that's one of the things I think that humans have been doing. And whether it's African or Asian or anything,
Mhm.
there is that connection with the music that's so important. But classical just happens to be very precise.
Right.
Are you usually in fours or eights? Um, or
Yeah.
do you have music that's in Indian music or some that's in seven or nine or 13s?
Yeah. I mean, it can be so, a 4 or an 8 is definitely typical. Sometimes it'll be like a 6 or a waltz. You're often doing a
Mhm.
waltz, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's very common in ballet. And when you find the time signature, and if it's consistent throughout a piece, like you kind of get a rhythm in your body going, and it almost ties into your breath a little bit. Like, I think of a waltz, for example, and I feel like I can almost imagine myself breathing at the right pace for a waltz while I'm dancing, and the
Yeah,
kind of that go with that. So that's definitely a cool thing. But there are pieces, like there's a lot of ballets that I've learned parts of to, Stravinsky, where it is not consistent and it's extremely hard to count. And also, I mean, it's classical music, but it doesn't have a, I mean, I hope I'm right, but a melody, so to speak. It's just kind of like to the untrained ear, and to my ear, sometimes it's just a little bit spastic, or it has a lot of elements and they're sharp and they come on, unexpected, and counting it's not consistent. And so those things, you kind of just have to familiarize yourself with that piece
right.
and, know it like the back of your hand. And memorize it, because it's not going to just be, well, I'll pick it back up on the one, or that's a moment where you got to know it, from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Just have to know it. So another question that excuse me,
Mhm.
often where I like to ask, because it's kind of the purpose of the podcast in a sense, is what is that power of music? I mean, when I talk to musicians about it, they talk about playing on stage or it can change your mood and all these things. But for a dancer, I mean, it certainly grabbed you when you were young, but
Yeah.
what is that power of music? I'm sure you've seen it with other dancers. I mean, how does it affect the other dancers? How does it affect the audiences? Do you have sort of thoughts about that or perspectives on that power of music? I mean, you're out there in the front of everybody dancing around and little shoes and stuff.
Definitely. I mean, I've often found myself like, sometimes, performing a piece can be very challenging or it's nerve-wracking. And, the music, sometimes if you love the music for whatever reason, it can be an intelligent reason or not, just a personal, emotional reason, it guides you. Like, it can get you through a really challenging dance experience. And, I think even when you were asking that question, I was just thinking about sometimes even just in class, as a ballet dancer, you take class every morning, maybe for an hour and a half, and you do sort of the same kinds of steps or combinations, every day with little variations on them and stuff like that. And usually, if you're lucky, you might have a live pianist in the corner and they just play, familiar pieces, things that you've heard a million times. And some of them you've done a million of these steps too. And some of them you just love. Like, there's, there's moments where I'm getting ready to do a combination. Okay, 7 and 8. They play the intro and I'm like, oh, I love this one. And it kind of helps me get through the day. And, I don't know, maybe it's a piece of Chopin, or it's like, that's because that tends to be a personal favorite, or it's, a little like Mozart ditty. And you just really like the feeling of dancing to it. And it kind of can guide you and get you through. And I think that that's a really powerful thing, because obviously, I talked about like so much of creating ballet is about the music. It goes hand in hand, and it's, usually people pick, if they're making a new work, you pick your music first, and like that drives the entire, thing. I mean, sometimes you can start by making up some steps, sure, but to me, I don't know how I would really make up a whole lot of steps without knowing what it would be to the music, because that is just,
Right.
that's how serious the connection is. And so, yeah, I think that there's so many ways, big and small, in which a dancer feels that power of music. And I think that every ballet dancer and dancer in general knows the power of music and knows that we would not be able to do what we do without music, classical or of any kind. And I think that, I mean, it like, yeah, it's almost half the art in a way is still the music. It's that important for sure.
Right. Right. Um, so in terms of, power of music, one of the things that I kind of ran across, a friend of mine said one time we were playing some music. No. She was, we were just talking about different things. And she said, well, we do sacred dance because we believe dance solves problems. And I thought, wow, dance solves problems. How does it do that? Because I haven't really heard people talk about music as solving problems necessarily. Like, oh yeah, music solves problems. You just play a little music and all your problems go away. It's kind of a different context. But then I went out and to Esalen Institute, and I spent a week doing this 5 rhythms dance where you kind of embody, you're dancing, but you're embodying almost your decision making process. You start out with kind of lyrical, and then all of a sudden you get a problem and it's chaotic, and then it gets a little bit frantic, and it's chaos, and I guess it's staccato, then chaos, and then you get back down to, the flow, easy flow, and then you get to silence in a way. And I had never really thought about, you know, dancing as a way of sort of embodying motion to music as a way of solving problems. But does that resonate at all with you? And maybe even when people watch that,
Yeah,
that may resonate with the audiences some.
definitely. I mean, I think I have before I start, I have a question for you. When you're talking about that dance you were doing, was it mainly like it's all improvisation kind of? It's all
Just
just
wandering around like this and you're dancing, and then you start dancing like this, and then, so it's all just whatever you're feeling in your body.
like, yeah, I mean, so that's a thing for dancers is improv, which like usually is tied to more contemporary stuff. You don't usually do a lot of classical ballet improv, but there's moments where you're like working with a new choreographer and they tell you, okay, let me just play the music and just like dance to it and just like let go. And when I was a little bit younger, and still now, sometimes I found that to be a very daunting exercise and task, because I was like, well, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? Give me direction, which that's just who I am as a person sometimes. But as I've gotten older and I've had more experiences with it, I've learned that, you have, especially if you've been trained, and even if you haven't, like, you have the bodily intelligence to just move to the music however you want. And I think when you can let go and experience that, sounds like the way that you did, and I've experienced it myself. It really is, I mean, talk about solving problems. I feel like it kind of helps you solve some personal problems sometimes. I don't know if it's like just because you trusted yourself and you just trusted what you heard in the music and trusted how you were feeling physically in that moment, but it can be a very cool experience for sure. So that's one thing I think about, and what the point that you were bringing up led me to thinking about. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like solving world problems, I mean, it's just like like, why do we all, see performing arts? It's to kind of just, connect us to our own experiences, to let us in on other experiences, to learn about the world, other cultures, and just honestly to go see things that are amazing and blow you away. Even as someone who's done a lot of dancing and tried to do a lot of tricks and skills and things, when I go see ballet and I see someone do something that I think is just physically insane, it still blows me away just as much as it would have, when I was first getting started, or I think if I didn't know,
And I
how to,
guess
yeah,
inspiring as well, inspiring you to think,
yeah,
oh, I can do more than I think I can do. Even at that level, you're
right.
sort of injecting a broader problem solving aspect into it. I have heard that there are, a lot of amazing classical musicians who can't really sit down and jam. Well, I know I could give me the music. I need to see the music as opposed to just playing. But even for a lot of musicians, myself, one of the things is I can learn a song, but just to be able to jump into some improvisational music and make it work is, that is kind of daunting, as you say.
Totally. I think it's really been something I've been trying to work on recently as like a more classically trained ballet dancer, which you could compare to a classically trained musician. Being asked to just go, and it's like you have all the skills in the world, and yet you feel like, no, I need some direction, but yeah, I think it's just trusting your as I said, your bodily intelligence and your skill set, because obviously having the ability to like have someone teach you, you know something incredibly difficult and tell you exactly what to do and replicate it is an amazing skill in and of itself. but being able to take charge and explore something with your body that you know, no one really told you how to do it and you kind of came up with something cool. That's like a whole nother thing in and of itself. And yeah, that's something I've been trying to work on. So
Very
I
cool. So,
yeah.
and you did mention focus. You know, they talk about, and I remember when my kids were little, you know, and for me, sports were a big thing. It's kind of, as you're growing up, it's a way to uh, learn things, alleviate stress, but also to, you know, if you get down, if you screw something up, you get back up and you keep trying to do it. And there's sort of life lessons in there. I mean, you're pretty young, but you probably have learned quite a few life lessons through dance already.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. There are so many moments where I've had to, you know, I mean, look, a lot of the time I've had a teacher or coach or someone in the front of the room telling me that I should be better at something and telling me how to do it and how they think I should do it. But there's a lot of moments where you're on your own and, you know, to really work on something and get it better, you have to kind of take yourself aside and say, okay, let me assess what's going on here. Why am I falling to the right out of that turn every single time, you know, and what can I do? And I mean, you become really self-aware, aware of your body. And yeah, it takes definitely like determination and, you know, sort of just being a responsible human to kind of make yourself work and do those things when, you know, you sometimes are ready to kind of give it up or take a rest. And, you know, sometimes you have to work it out yourself and self motivate. And that's something I really feel like I learned from ballet, and you know, it definitely helps in other aspects of my life for sure.
So you probably your whole life you've been more focused than a lot of people, and so learned
Yeah.
a lot through that. I mean, here you are out in Seattle doing the ballet thing. It's really so cool. You know, I don't have, I'm not sure I have more questions because I don't know that much about music and ballet. But is there anything that I haven't asked about that maybe came up to you while you were thinking that you might want to, you know, tell us about or mention or bring up before we, you know, wrap up our little conversation here? But it's been so nice just to be able to finally talk with you about some of these things
Oh,
and hear what you have to say. And it's like for posterity now.
yeah, I've enjoyed it so much. I'm trying to think. I feel like if there's one thing, yeah, that kind of keeps coming up to my mind, it's just that feeling. It's so funny. It's almost like it's weird. It almost feels kind of childish sometimes. But like when I hear a piece of music that I love, and I guess it's mainly classical music, you know, things that I've learned, ballets or variations we call them, which are like little solos, you know, and you love that music in particular. And when I hear it or it comes into my mind and gets into my head, it just makes me want to dance. And sometimes you don't always want to dance. You know, it's very hard. It's hard on your body. It's more exercise than a lot of people get in, you know, a
Yeah.
week or whatever. And it can be really, it's a physical challenge and it can be a mental challenge. But the music can totally push you through. And like sometimes I'll just get oh, you know, oh, but I love that music. Let me, you know, hum it in my head and do that little step for a second just because it brings me joy. And, you know, maybe it's something you're good at and the music really kind of, you know, lays it out for you perfectly. Like, oh, I'm really good at, you know, doing that double turn and finishing right on the flick of that music on that note. And then when you do it, it's just satisfying like no other as a dancer. So I think that music is totally the driving force of dance, in my opinion. And I think it has helped me personally, yeah, find a lot of joy in it in moments that otherwise would have been challenging, you know. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time to do this because we've been meaning to do it for a while and we finally did. But it's also, I'm hoping that, you know, again, if there's a few folks listening, that they'll be, I think you've given them some insight into ballet and music and something that maybe they haven't thought about too much. And so
Yeah.
that's what we're about, just having conversations about the power of music and finding commonalities and so that hopefully we can do all these things, so use all these things that we're doing to make a little bit of a better world. So Natalie Glassie, I am so proud of you, and really just you're amazing and beautiful, and it's so great to be able to take this time to talk with you, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been so fun. Love talking about music. I love talking about ballet. And so this was the perfect place to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you.
Namaste. See you soon.
Namaste.
Bye. Maybe at the holidays. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.